Hey, Dom here, PhD weight loss coach. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about how to burn fat and lose weight. So we're going to kind of go into more in depth on how that process works and what's kind of going on in the body in actually using fat as energy, because that's what we want to do when we're trying to lose weight. We want it to be burned mostly from our stored body fat, and we want to preserve our muscle mass. That's going to be so important when we're on any kind of weight loss program. So I'm going to kind of pull up what I want to talk about today. And how to burn fat and lose weight. Very important. And again, for any weight loss program, we really want to make sure that the weight that we are losing is mostly stored body fat, because that's going to be the healthiest way. We want to preserve our muscle mass because that's also going to keep our metabolism up, which is so important. So controlling insulin levels is really the main key factor here when we want to be using mostly stored body fat as energy. So kind of what insulin is, it's the body's key hormone in energy management. So when carbohydrates are consumed, blood sugar or glucose levels start to rise. So the pancreas is the organ that secretes insulin and is activated and releases insulin. And insulin's key role determines whether the body takes more energy from carbohydrates or from fats. So when insulin levels are low, the body's using mostly stored fat for energy. So you're in a fat burning state, which is great. But when insulin levels are high, the body's using mostly carbohydrates or blood sugar or glucose for energy, and that's more fat storing. So if we're constantly throughout the day having high spikes of insulin because we're consuming really high sugary foods that really spike up insulin levels and our blood sugar levels, we're really not tapping into our fat stores because we have plenty of ready-to-go energy from the carbohydrates and the sugars that we're consuming. So really the process of metabolism, so carbohydrates are the main energy source of the body. So our body wants to use our carbohydrates, what we have readily available. And this is kind of like a little diagram showing how that process works between the macronutrients of fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. So if you have your carbohydrates, that's kind of in the center because that's branching off. So you can obviously, we don't want to be using proteins from our muscle mass to use as energy stores. But you would get that if you were in starvation mode. Again, our body would take from our protein source, which we don't want. Also take from our fat source, but fat is a good source of energy as well, because if we had extra fat stores in our body, we'll use it for energy. But if you could see on the bottom of carbohydrates, it'll kind of dump into for brain metabolism, because that is kind of the go-to source to, again, our brain takes up so much energy needs that is a go-to. Glucose for brain metabolism, for all of our regulation and processes there. But it also will dump into kind of that little bucket that shows metabolism and excess nutrients. So again, extra body fat, so it'll dump it in there to store as body fat in case we run into a situation where we're in starvation mode, that we will have energy to keep going. But again, we're not really dealing with any situations that we're going to be in a starvation mode or scenario in that sense, that we don't need to be having any extra carbohydrates being stored as body fat. We want to tap into the excess that we already have. So that's why we kind of reducing the carbohydrates, especially this is simple sugars. So the sodas, the candies, the processed different sugar added pastries, etc., stuff like that. That's not going to be helping our weight loss measures at all. So excess glucose from high carbohydrate intake increases insulin production, and the body stops burning fat and stores the excess glucose as fat, like we were talking about. So a constant cycle of high insulin spikes from low glycemic carbs and sugary drinks puts the body in a constant state of storing fat. So that's why we want to change that up. So we want to live in the fat burning state. So key principles to keep insulin low and fat burning high. Number one, managing your total calorie intake. So important. So total calories consumed must be less than expended. So being in a calorie deficit, that's going to be key. That's like number one, that must happen. Even if you're having carbohydrates, we have to keep it to a minimum, but it's just overall intake to a minimum regardless. And then number two, that's also very important to help enhance being in the fat burning state, is insulin levels must remain low throughout the day. So no huge insulin spikes, keeping our sugar intake and simple carbohydrates very low, and also spacing out our meals throughout the day. So kind of difference between 2 meals per day versus 6 meals a day. So that's like 2 meals a day. That would be like a longer intermittent fasting for like 16 hours or something like that. You only eat like 2 meals more like in the afternoon. There's some pros and cons, but some pros, if it's close together, and healthy low calories can put the body in a fat burning state, like a fasting state, so you're burning mostly fat. Some of the cons may be extremely difficult to adhere to due to hunger pains, fatigue. They put the body into starvation mode. It could lower your basal metabolic rate, depending on your ratio of macronutrients. If you're not having enough proteins, again, you may be using muscle mass for energy, especially if you're doing it longer term. So you can lose weight that way, but you're going to be super hungry, and it's going to be rough starting, especially if you're not used to eating only 2 times a day. So 6 meals a day, which I really prefer. Obviously 6 way smaller meals per day, but I think there's way more pros to that. So smaller meals every 2 to 3 hours helps keep insulin low. So it really keeps you in the fat burning state. It's easier to follow due to feeling full and having higher energy levels. So you don't feel hungry or like starving all the time because you're eating frequently, but it's smaller, lower glycemic meals that helps preserve muscle mass, especially if you're keeping good amount of protein, adequate amount of protein with all your little meals. And really the con just making sure that you pack enough healthy low calorie food. So you just have to make sure you have a good set nutritional plan, which is going to be important. So yeah, I hope that helped being in the fat burning state, and some ways to help lose weight and make it mostly stored body fat. That's what we want. We want to preserve our muscle. We want to look healthy, strong, lean, and we want to be losing mostly from stored body fat. So that will help when you're keeping the insulin low throughout the day. So I hope this was a helpful video, and see you next time.